Also, I know you've been in a lot of sessions all day, so we'll try to keep it high energy and very interactive, so you can do a little talking and participating as well. Just to get a quick lay of the land, who in here is a founder or entrepreneur? Great. Who in here is an investor? Great, we've got a few of you, awesome. How about ecosystem builders? Awesome. Other? What's the other? Professors, also, okay, great. You get to be part of the ecosystem. You're good ecosystem builders. Awesome, okay, that helps me tremendously, thank you. So for those of you I have not met or who haven't had the torment of seeing me on another panel, I'm Carolyn Rods. I'm the founder and CEO of Hello Alice. The short of it is that we are a platform for entrepreneurs, connecting them to capital, accelerator programs, opportunities to help them grow, ultimately with the goal of helping them build healthier, more sustainable businesses. When we started Hello Alice back in I softly say 2015, but we really launched the platform in 2017. I was told time and time again that small business was not a payable market, or this is not a viable business model, or this won't work, or you're never gonna build what you think you're supposed to build. And I knew there are, in the United States alone, 33.2 million small businesses out there. If these businesses make money, if these businesses are strong, governments make more money, communities drive more capital, there's more jobs created, corporations selling into these small businesses make more money. There's a real business model here. And I think the one thing that I've learned, and what I want to talk through today a little bit, is in our experience of pitching, to date we've raised over $28 million in capital, in venture capital from a variety of funders. We've raised from angel investors, from private capital, people like Melinda Gates, Jackie Zehner, who was the first female partner at Goldman Sachs, from Gene and Steve Case. We've raised over a lot of private capital, people like Serena Williams. We've raised a lot of venture capital from Silicon Valley Bank, from QED Capital, one of the top fintech funds. And we've also raised strategic capital from corporations like MasterCard. We've raised from a wide variety of funders. We also got a lot of grant capital. We got a lot from early stage partnerships. And none of it was easy, ever. And so oftentimes I hear these stories. I always laugh. One of my favorite times raising capital, we were actually at Lightspeed pitching in our early days. And my business partner and I walked in, and the investor came in almost 30 minutes late to the meeting, walks in, and we're sitting there, we're pitching, and the whole time we're like, this isn't resonating. Like, he's not getting it, doesn't understand us, not interested, this isn't going anywhere. And we look across the hall and we see these guys walk out of the room and they're high-fiving each other, and we're like, that pitch went well. We're like, our pitch didn't go well. But with every single pitch, and Lightspeed honestly has been an incredible partner of ours over the years. I have nothing but good things to say about them. With every pitch, I learned a ton. I've since become an investor myself, and being on the other side of the table, have learned a lot. And what I often find is that there's such a disconnect. I felt like when I look back to my early days pitching, there was so much intimidation on my end. I remember walking into those first VC funds on Sand Hill Road and walking in and being like, I don't know how this works. I don't know what a term sheet is. I don't know how to raise venture capital. I know I have a great business opportunity here. I believe in what I'm doing enough to give up every other, career path right now and put everything into this and risk a lot and pour my time and energy into this, but I don't know how to raise capital. And it was a lot of trial and error. And now looking back, I think the biggest learning for me was that we're the same. Whether you're the investor on one side of the table or whether you're the founder on one side of the table, we're all raising money all the time for our companies. We're all trying to find that successful business idea. We're all trying to innovate and think about what's coming next. We have way more in common than we do in differences. And I think there's such an opportunity that if we work together in a much better way, we could actually accomplish so much more. And so instead of this sort of us and them mentality that it often feels like when you're out raising capital, thinking about it as we are all part of this innovation ecosystem, and here's how we can build and grow and make this thing better for all of us, is really going to change the way that we get more hands into the capital of really great founders, and that we all make more money as a result. So that's the essence of what I want to talk about today. And I'm going to start with the relationship building, because I think it's so important that to think through at the very beginning when we're first starting out and we're first starting to look for those investors. I think there's a lot of conversation around what to put in your pitch deck and how to present your company and all of those things. I'm not really going to talk about any of that in this session. I think it's more important to think about the relationships that we're building on both sides. And that means, for those of you that are investors, how are you thought of in the ecosystem? Because entrepreneurs talk a lot. And for entrepreneurs, it's how are you presenting yourselves to these investors? Because investors talk. We talk a lot. So it's super important to think about what are the conversations that are being had about you, and how are you putting yourself in the very best light so that those conversations are beneficial to what you're trying to do versus detrimental or neutral, even worse, non-existent. When you're trying to think about getting in the door with an investor, one of the things I think oftentimes people think is that if we just email enough, if we just show up enough, if we just hound them enough, if we just reach out enough, we're going to get through. And the reality is, like any relationship, it starts with how are you building credibility? Because there are a lot of voices to be heard. There's a lot of pitches out there. There's a lot of people with business ideas. The reality is a lot of them are not ready for venture capital. We see it all the time. I think probably one of the biggest conversations I have with founders is you're not there yet, and you're going to waste your time and you're going to waste investors' time. So here are the things that you need to do to get your business ready to be venture backable. All of that you can see online. You can see what investors are looking for. Talk to the investors in the room and ask them. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through that because I think there's a lot of content around there that's great about what you need to do to get venture ready. But what I do want to talk about is how you're building credibility so that your pitch rises to the top. And when you are venture ready, you're getting those meetings. The first is trying to find, if you possibly can, a warm introduction. We're all more receptive to warm introductions. That's why we come to events like these. That's why we take the time to network with the people around us. Do your research. And the reality is, in this day and age, it is so easy to find a warm introduction. Even if you have no connections, you're on the outs, you don't have a reason, you can find a warm introduction. I say that as someone who had never gotten any venture capital. I grew up in Spring, Texas, to a Bolivian mother and an Irish Catholic father with no experience in entrepreneurship. I didn't even know what venture capital was growing up. And I found warm introductions. But it takes a lot of work. It means that you're out, you're building networks, you're here, you're at places that you're always looking for investors, that you're talking to entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs that are funded have investors, and they have connections with those investors. And if you can build a relationship with them, you can build a relationship with their investors ultimately, and a referral and a recommendation. It means being a convener. How are you getting active in your own community? So you're showing up to startup events, you're hosting startup events, you're speaking on panels, you're working your way into those things. Volunteer, give your time, show up when people need you. And the more you do that and make a practice of that, not just with respect to fundraising, but with respect to everything that you're doing for your business, you're gonna get those warm referrals. So I always cringe when people tell me, they're like, oh, I can't get investors. Like, I don't know anybody. No one will answer my emails. I don't have that kind of network. I'm on the outs. Most people are on the outs. And a lot of people that get funded started off on the outs. You have to work your way in. You have to get your seat at that table. It's harder for some people than for others. If you grew up and your mother or father was a venture capitalist, or you have LPs in your family, it's definitely easier for you. But everybody can do it. So work your way towards those warm referrals. For investors in the room, I think one of the things, if you ever are in a conversation with an investor or are an investor, also create pathways to open up those warm referrals. Make it as easy as you can, because you never know where the next great innovation is, and it's important to be open. On the same side, when I hear entrepreneurs say, can't get a warm referral, I can't get in. When I hear investors put things on their website and they say, referrals only, or we don't take open solicitations, or we don't put our email out there, I also cringe, because you're shutting the door to some really great ideas and you don't know where those ideas will come from. Take the time to parse through those things. It is a little bit of extra effort, but you can start to build really great filters. In this day of AI especially, it's so easy to find really great ideas really efficiently. So open those pathways up. Where you don't have a warm referral, again, do your research. Get on LinkedIn, find out who these people know, find out how you can knock on doors. I would love to open it up to you all, because I know there's people in this room who have gotten into an investor that they probably didn't know, or investors who have connected with an entrepreneur that they didn't previously know. I would love to hear from you all where some of those connections came from. And y'all just raise your hand, stand up. We're gonna make this super interactive so that you all can learn from each other, because I certainly don't have all the answers. And I know there's some great answers out here. So if you have met an entrepreneur outside of your network with a great idea, or you've met an investor that you did not previously have a relationship with, what did you do to get in the door and build that relationship? You'll raise your hands and jump in. Right there.
So one thing to consider, this is for all business networking, is if you have an event like this, right, study all the presenters. Who's at the event? And then go listen to them speak. So that's my top tip is trade shows, whatever. People pay to be there, and they're there for a reason, and they're using their time. So these are valuable assets of the person. But here's the second thing. You've got to be ready to deliver clear, concise, and compelling reasons to be connected to them. So you'll need to explain to them after having done 2, 3, 4 hours of due diligence, watch their YouTube videos, that you know what they're all about. You don't just walk up to them and say, I hear you have a big fat wallet, and I need your money, and I have a great idea. Well, you're now one of 10,000 other people that have said that to them in this calendar year. But if you walk up and you say, your opinion about fintech and how it's a 5-year time horizon, I believe the exact same thing. In fact, the problem you identified in your YouTube video last year, I'm solving that problem right now. And if possible, would it be a problem for us to get together for 10 minutes after you're done here and have a conversation about it? So you've got to build your own momentum with that stranger, and you've got to be compelling. They say clear, concise, and compelling is contagious. So if you get clear, concise, and compelling through, that's contagious. And that doesn't have to be the partner you're targeting. It could be someone else from that firm. So for example, at this event, there is someone from Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich & Rosati, the premier law firm for startups in Silicon Valley. Also the most expensive one, the one that founded Google and many other big startups. So there's someone at this conference from Wilson Sonsini. The banks, Silicon Valley Bank prior, and the law firms have relationships with all the investors because they get rewarded if they bring a good deal to the table. So that's another place where you can navigate your way to investment capital of some nature. So there's a lot to it.
Really great advice. I feel like you need to be up here. What's your name and what organization are you with?
My name is Michael Lourdeau, and I'm with my company is Integrity One, but I live here in Puerto Rico.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any others? Right here.
Good to see you again, Carolyn.
Hi. Yes, great to see you.
So my name is Anu Bardwaj, and I am the founder of Sheconomy. I just moved to Puerto Rico a month ago, so I'm new here. Hi to everybody that's here locally. And my investor that I pitched, I want to say 10 years ago, I had a company called Women Investing, Women Digital. And I reached out to Princess Rima bin Bandar Al Saud, and she is the current Saudi ambassador to the US now. I reached out to her on Facebook, asked her to be on my podcast, Women Investing in Women and Girls, and she brought her daughter on the show, and my daughter was on the show also, and she was 4 years old at the time. My babysitter was my co-host, my nanny was the producer, and we made this show, and it was amazing. It was at Voice America Studios. They were in the middle of a dust storm, and we recorded her voice, her vision, what she wanted to do, and also her daughter's vision at the same time. And we got off the call, and she said, what can I do? How can I support? How can I be involved with what you're building? And I said, well, I'm actually looking for an investor. And it doesn't have to be a big check. I just need you. And she said, done. Call my lawyer tomorrow. And she was one of my original investors 10 years ago. Now, fast forward, COVID happened, and we decided to take our one podcast and turn it into a podcast listening app, similar to Spotify. Why not? So we applied for an Islamic Development Bank COVID innovation competition, and out of 5,000 applications, 175 countries, there were 30 winners, 7 women, we won the grand prize. First check came from the Royal Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Oman, UAE, Bangladesh, and Indonesia decided to partner with us. So that initial investment, which was long ago, like when they said, who else is with you? I'm like, we've got this person. It just parlayed into something much bigger. And now we're the world's first and only podcast listening app for women, built on 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G devices, 175 countries. And it's just scaled over COVID to smartphones and dumb phones. But reach out, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, as Carolyn mentioned. You can use social media. You never know where it's going to go. Never met her in person. Went to see her in Maui, took my daughter surfing for the first time. Met her just to say thank you for all of this that happened. So that's
wonderful.
my story.
Thank you so much. Great story. Okay, you talked about the research aspect of this, and I think one of the things that is so important is that as you're doing your research, finding those points outside even of the business case. What are those points of connection that you can make across various aspects? I think the more that we can start to connect on a human level with one another, again, the more that you start to build that foundation. So many investors that we have had are people that we ultimately established personal relationships with, and that means understanding what their needs were, understanding what their interests were, understanding what their families were like, figuring out where do you have those common points of connection so that you can build something really meaningful. Some of the easiest investments that I've gotten have been from Latinos through organizations. One, because we had a really instant common foundation from which to build a relationship. So it certainly makes it easier. When we talk about people investing in people like themselves, it does make it easier. A lot of our investors are women. We immediately get into conversations about things like motherhood or things like being, the woman in the room or whatever it might be, but you have points of commonality that are really easy to establish. You have common points with every single person in the room. I don't care who the investor is on the other side of the table. There is something as a human that you both have in common, and it's your job to try to find those points of commonality so that you can push that relationship forward. Same thing on the other side of the table. Find those points of commonality so that you can be a real human and not this, very kind of intimidating investor on the other side of the table. One, because everybody walks away with a better feeling from that meeting. And two, you're starting to lay the foundation for a relationship that's much deeper than a single investment. The other piece is thinking about how important your reputation is when you leave that room. When you go into a pitch, as an entrepreneur, it's obviously quite intimidating, particularly if you haven't done it a lot. Those first few pitches, I think, can be incredibly intimidating. Once you've done enough, they're still intimidating because probably most of what you've heard is a no, and that's okay. That's normal. That's part of the process. I think at this point, we've certainly talked to hundreds of investors, if not, we're probably closing in on 1,000 at some point, I think. Most of the time, it's not even specifically looking for funding. It's just starting to build those relationships because you don't know where they're important, you don't know how the dots are going to connect, you don't know when it might be relevant, to what stage of your business. It's just important to build relationships across the ecosystem as a whole if you're an entrepreneur, because it comes back to support you and your business in different ways. But your reputation is everything in this world. And so when you are approaching an investor, making the most of their time, be efficient. You mentioned being really clear. It's so important to know what are you trying to get across? How quickly can you communicate that? How quickly can you establish credibility in that conversation to push it forward? On the flip side, for investors, I think it's really important to think about when you're listening to an entrepreneur, recognizing that they have put everything into this business. They've put it all on the line. They're throwing their whole, somebody described it once to me as Like, you know what pitching is like? Like, it's like walking into a room and you show someone your baby and you're so proud of this baby because you think it's the most incredibly beautiful, perfect thing in the world. And somebody looks at you and says, that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And they turn around and walk away. She's like, that's what pitching feels like. I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. The reality is, I think I've met investors who've been so helpful and beneficial and so empathetic in terms of what the entrepreneurial experience is like. I find some of the best investors to be people who've actually operated and run businesses because they understand what it's like to be on the other side of the table. But I think the more that you can be clear, concise with your time, that you can communicate what you need, and that you can communicate the opportunity and be really confident walking into that room that you have a great opportunity. These investors want to make money. They're in the business of finding companies that are going to be high growth, great returns on their investments. Most of them are operating off of money from their LPs, and they have to provide strong returns. So in the same way that you have to go find the opportunities in your industry and your market to find a great return, they have to find businesses that are going to provide a great return. You are bringing them an opportunity, and you have to convince them not just that it's a good opportunity, but that it is the best opportunity for the money that they have to allocate. As investors, I think it's really important to take the time to listen. So many times, I think it's very easy because you see lots of different companies, you're very familiar with the market, you're looking at multiple competitors in a space, you see trend lines, you see thematics across a space. There's a lot to share. It's very easy to sort of quickly try to put a company into a box. And the reality is, I think some of the greatest companies that are some of the best opportunities don't fit into a box. And so when you think about an investment thesis, you say, okay, we invest in these sectors, we invest in these spaces, we invest in these types of founders at these stages. It's constantly, often, I think, an exercise of looking to check a box. As a founder, you have to find, how do you quickly prove that you check those boxes, that you can fit that mold? But don't be afraid of the areas where you don't, or where you sit outside of some of that. Don't try to hide it. Don't try to make it fit where it doesn't fit. Be clear about where it might work or where it might not. But also be clear about why this is such a great opportunity. If I think back to the investors that were most helpful when we were pitching, they were the ones that said, look, here's what we've learned across the space. Here's why I think this is not a good idea, or here's why I think this is a great idea, and I'm intrigued by what you're talking about. And both areas of feedback are really helpful for us. I love hearing why people think my business ideas won't work. I love people poking the holes in what they don't think is going to work. Sometimes I listen to them. Sometimes I say, you don't get what we're trying to do. We're trying to do something different. And I don't listen to them. But every time I learn something and I at least start to say, okay, here are the hurdles that we need to overcome. Here are the obstacles that we need to present against. Here's how people might be thinking about how we're going to present our business. So how do I help overcome those hurdles earlier in the next pitch? How do I help try to get myself into the ways that they might be thinking about this space? But I think the important thing is that as entrepreneurs, we listen and we take time to process and hear what's being said on the other side of the table. I think as investors, it's really important to listen because entrepreneurs are in the trenches and they're hearing what's going on. They're operating in a space. Learn about the market because it's only going to help you become better investors and to figure out how can you apply what they're hearing and how do you take that and think about a market as a whole so that you can find the best investments and the best opportunities going forward. I'm curious for those that have pitched, how many of you have actually actively fundraised in this room? A handful? Awesome. Okay. I would love to hear some stories about the best pitching experience and why, when you walked away from a meeting, that you felt like an investor was really beneficial and really helpful to that pitching experience. Let me say either the best or the worst. If you say the worst, don't name names, but the best or the worst, and why? Right here. I would introduce yourself for us too.
Hi, I'm Himanshu Bhatia from Recover Healthcare. I'm coming from New Jersey. I don't know if I have a best or a worst story to share, but something in between. And really the big takeaway is, just don't give up because you may not be a fit for everyone. So I was pitching at this one event in New Jersey a couple of months back. Room full of investors, usual questions, no outcome seems to come. And so I'm like, okay, all done. You shut down your laptop, you're walking out, and then there's this guy kind of following me. And I was like, I was not trying to be rude, but I was like, okay, what do you want? Of course, I turn around, I talk nicely to the guy. Long story short, he was like, I was really digesting all that you said, and I'm very, very interested in, talking to you. Fast forward a couple of months, that guy ended up investing $2 million as, the main guy for our Series A, which is kind of, about to close. So really just keep your options open. You may not be a fit for everyone. And it was kind of unbelievable, but that, when I thought all the doors had shut, but there was this one guy who kind of came after me. So yeah, that's all.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on that, and great example of being resilient, having the grit and tenacity needed to be an entrepreneur. Any other best or worst examples of a pitching experience, and why?
So the one pitching experience, which was in a similar timing to this market, it's a tough market right now. So the investors have, the power because, the market's down. So this is, 2004, 2005 when the market was down. Researching everyone, if you can find out who's going to be in the room and researching them and knowing something about them and including that in your pitch. So a reference to their work history, a reference to something that they believe in, and embedding that in your presentation. So you can, in the middle of a slide presentation, you turn and you say, yeah, Tom, you'll totally get this because you spent 20 years in the data center market. So you know that this is a trend, right? The investors are investing in you as the founder. They're evaluating you because they want to know that you can sell your product to the market. If you can't represent your concept to them with confidence, if that trust transfer doesn't happen to them, then they'll question whether you would ever be able to transfer trust to a prospective customer or strategic partner or even key employee, rock stars, so on and so forth. So that was a overall good experience. They wanted to invest. There was a conflict of interest with their partner that understood the category that we were in. So we did not get investment, but we would have otherwise.
Really great example. And again, I think the more you can start to build those points of connection, one, it shows that you're detail oriented, that you care, that you're paying attention, and that you're tailoring the pitch to the needs of that investor. I think one of the things that's also really important when you're pitching, so often I find so many times when I've been pitched to, that entrepreneurs come in and they're almost deferential to what you're saying. I think ultimately it stems from just a lack of confidence or an over eagerness for the investment. And so I think coming into the room with a great deal of confidence in that you know this space and market better than they do. They may know the sector as a whole, they may know kind of macro, but your specific business, you are the expert in your business and you have to own that expertise. And that means on both sides of the table, one, respecting that this investor has a perspective that's much broader than yours, and so respect their expertise, but also own your own expertise. And when something is said that is not in alignment with where your company is going or what you're trying to do, respectfully take back your expertise and command ownership of the conversation and where you're trying to shift the discussion. Because it's very easy in a pitch to lose command and control of the conversation as an entrepreneur. And so you have to constantly be shifting the discussion where you need to shift it in a way that's ultimately, again, trying to build that credibility, trying to build that relationship, and trying to build that foundation for investment. I think from the investor perspective, again, you have a lot of feedback to offer. Share that feedback and share that expertise, but also take a step back and let the entrepreneur get their point across. When they're veering off track or when they're veering into a space that is not beneficial to them or conducive to them, pull it back. But oftentimes, I think it's letting them get through their pitch and letting them get through what they're trying to say before jumping in. And that requires both sides, alignment on both sides, that there is a format and a structure in terms of how that conversation can most effectively move forward. So don't be afraid to put the boundaries in as an entrepreneur pitching, and also as an investor, making sure that you're respecting the expertise on the other side of the table while owning your own expertise. I talked a little bit about reputation, I think why that's so important. I decided early on when I was pitching, because I saw so many bad practices when I was out pitching in terms of just the way people interacted, the way those relationships were managed, that didn't feel conducive, frankly, to a very inclusive investment environment. When I should be clear that when I started raising capital, the environment was very different than where it is today. It's come a long way in the best of ways. But I think that starts with all of us, and I think we all take ownership and we all take responsibility for how the investment ecosystem and the innovation ecosystem as a whole operates. And that means giving really valuable feedback immediately and in the moment, or immediately following a meeting. When we would go into a pitch and we saw either times where we felt like we weren't being respected, and I'll give an example. My co-founder and I are both women. We walked in multiple times to multiple funds where our male head of engineering was the one that was constantly questioned, referred to, looked at, turned to for responses, and they wouldn't even shake our hands sometimes, or they wouldn't even look at us, or they would assume that we were employees and he was the founder. That was feedback I would immediately give. I'm like, hey, just FYI, if other women come in and pitch, this is something you should be aware of. And honestly, most of the time, people were they were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that I walked past you and shook his hand and didn't shake yours. It's often not a conscious thing, but I do think it's important that we all take ownership over what's happening. On the flip side, I've had entrepreneurs come in completely disorganized to come pitch. And so I give them feedback. Hey, if you're gonna go pitch again, these are things that you can do that might improve the odds. This is how I perceived you, and this is why that might not be helpful to you moving forward. And so trying to build best practices where you see things, again, it's being helpful and not critical, but trying to make the experience better, because other people are gonna have to deal with this, and all of our reputations are ultimately at stake. So the more that you can help somebody put a good reputation out there, helps make the experience a little bit better for everybody. I can't remember where it was said earlier. Where it was said earlier about an investor who came around after a while. I think it was right here. You mentioned it. We had every lead investor that we have had in any of our rounds, and we've done a seed, A, B, and C. Every lead investor was initially a no for us. Every single one. I don't know if that's normal, or we just have bad luck with investors, I don't know, but they came around eventually. Our seed round was a friend who was a VC who had been advising us through the pitching process, because I mentioned we knew absolutely nothing about raising venture capital. He stepped in, helped us out, and we said, hey, would you be interested in investing? He said, no, not a fit, doesn't check the boxes for my fund, but happy to help you and support you guys. We continued to share feedback along the way. We also shared progress the entire time that we were raising. We said, hey, here's how the business is growing. Here's what we've learned. Here's what we heard. Here's how we applied it. And kept putting those proof points out. Never asked for funding again, except when we had closed all of the amount of funding that we needed. We just needed a lead. We needed somebody to set terms for the round. Said, hey, look, we've got all the capital here. Nobody here wants to lead. They all said they're willing to put capital forward, but we need a term sheet. Is there any chance you could just help us get a term sheet? And he said, you know what? Let me take this to my team. Let me talk it over. Really impressed with what you guys have done. Really, we had quite a bit of growth in the time when we started raising and when we closed the round. And he came back and said yes and led our round. It's since been an over 20x return for his investment. So it was a good investment for him and for his fund. But it was a no. And so part of it is just continuing with the conversation. Our Series A, similarly, SVB led that round. They were a no initially. We had asked them to join our seed round. They said no. We came back for our A. They ended up leading our A. We kept in touch all during that time to share our growth and share what we were doing. We send monthly updates to every single investor that we've ever had contact with, just to say, hey, here's how we're doing, here's how we're growing, here's ways that, here's what we've learned, here's how we've applied it. I'm sure some people just delete them, some people read them. Our B, same thing, QED Capital led that round. I had a conversation with Frank Rotman over at QED and said, hey, this is how we're thinking about rolling out some capital products for small business. And here we want to roll out a credit card. He said, I think that's the worst idea. That's a terrible idea. You shouldn't do it. And I said, well, we're going to do it anyway. Totally appreciate the feedback. And here's why we think it's a really good idea. Turns out he had a lot of really great insight that we did not listen to that we could have learned from. But he came back around after we rolled out the card. We had a great successful rollout with our credit card. And he came back in and said, one, I can't believe you actually got that thing done because I thought there was no way you were going to get a bank to sign on. We did. He's like, I thought there was no way you were going to get MasterCard to sign on. And we did. And he said, I don't know what you guys did because I know the market. I know how difficult it was to get that done. We're willing to invest and we want to lead you around. They've been incredible investors alongside us. Actually ended up leading our C as well. All that to say, no is a really common response with investments, but a relationship has to start somewhere and you have to start to layer and evolve and again, build that credibility and build those proof points over time. So don't let the relationship stop when you walk out the door. I think it's really important to stay in touch. One of the things we do is we just keep a list. We look at every time we've had a touch point with that investor, we have a database that we're just following up on when we've talked to people, when we've seen people, how can we connect and refer? So we're always referring companies over to funds, even ones that have said no to us, to be of value to them. Like I said before, we know investors are always fundraising. And so we're always looking for ways to say, hey, we had a meeting with Bank of America and they're investing in funds and we thought you'd be a great fit, so you should reach out to them. And here's the person to get in touch with. Always trying to help connect LPs over to them to help them do their jobs a little bit easier. And we're also always convening, so bringing people together so that funds can meet other funds, so that entrepreneurs can meet other funds, so that funds can meet other entrepreneurs, helping to build and grow the ecosystem. I mean, our business is in entrepreneurship, so it makes it a little bit easier, certainly, but there's no reason that you can't hold, thought leadership, conventions around your industry or around your community or around an area that is relevant to what you're doing. So find ways to convene, find ways to support and connect, and then find ways to share your thought leadership and expertise at every single turn. Okay, I'm going to stop talking because I did a lot of talking here. I want to hear questions from you all on either fundraising, on the investment side, on getting into founders' heads, getting into investors' heads, whatever it may be. So we'll open up the mic here for a bit for any questions that you all have. Anu.
So I have a question around valuation.
Oh, there's a microphone.
Oh, sorry. I have a question around valuation. When you started raising, did you set a number or did you get a outside valuation done or a 498? How did you go about this? And how does it work for the different rounds? Does it get more easier to start valuing?
I think every round we've really just put a number, to be honest. I mean, there's certainly metrics and there's multiples and things that are in the market has changed significantly. I should be really clear. Since we first started, we started in a market that was like anything goes. People were putting crazy multiples behind things. Typically, our board, I would say after our first round, our board would start to put like some input. And I would say we always gave pushback on, we think we can push this a little bit more, we think we can push this a little bit higher, let's see what the market tolerates. There's obviously always the guidance that you don't want to overvalue yourselves, but as a founder, you also don't want to give up too much equity. So I think until, I would say, our more recent rounds where as we get closer and closer to looking at, okay, what does, a liquidity event look like for us? Now we're starting to have to see, okay, there's sort of an upper limit in terms of where we feel like the market would tolerate. And so we're having to be a lot more thoughtful about our valuations. In the early days, it depends a lot on the investor. I think the reality is that we worked with a lot of bigger funds or bigger investors that were like, either this is going to work or it isn't. And if you value yourselves at 6 million or 8 million or 7 million or 5 million, whatever. Like they didn't really balk at any number or ask how we got to the valuation or ask for any backing there. But I've also heard experiences from entrepreneurs where their investors are negotiating everything they can. So I think it depends on the investor, but I think it's also, as a founder, setting some parameters around what you think is reasonable, how much you're trying to raise, making sure you're not giving up too much equity, but also making sure you're not on the upper limits of overvaluing your company and setting yourself up for failure on future rounds. The good news is we're in a down economy now, and so there's a lot of there's only one direction for us to go, I hope, right now. And so there's people are, I think, a little bit more thoughtful about what the valuation is, but it also means that there's a lot of room on the upside. Yes?
I think the valuation, though, also kind of just is a signal to how much you know about what's going on in the environment. And so if I think you're worth $10 million and you tell me you're raising at a $50 million valuation, it doesn't even make sense for me to, like, even if I invest at that valuation, it just feels like you're so far off from reality that it might not be worth the conversation. If you tell me, if I think you're worth 10 million and you're raising at 16, like, yeah, there's a difference, but at least it makes sense to have the conversation. So I think it does kind of just send a signal about how in touch with reality you are. Like, if you don't know what your valuation should be, talk to other people, who have raised or who, are maybe like a stage ahead of you, and get feedback before you put out a number that's completely off. Like, and maybe they'll say, oh yeah, you're not worth 30 million, you're worth, 20, and maybe you ask for 25 or something, and you can always ask for a little bit more, but, just kind of try to keep in some sense of reality to at least allow the conversation to happen.
Yeah, very, very good caveat to my comments. Get a range, and I would ask around, I would talk to peers in your market, I would talk to investors who've invested in your space, and get your kind of upper lower range, and within that, then you have to go with your gut of where you feel like you fall in that space. There's a lot of obviously publicly available information on what companies are raising at and what their valuations are that you can use as a barometer, but investors are really great for giving their feedback there too. And I think the same thing is on your projections. It's so hard, particularly in the early stages when you're building something that doesn't yet exist or trying to figure out future revenue streams, to say, here's where we're going to be in 2, 3, or 5 years. Like, you're typically thinking at that stage, you're thinking 3 months at a time of like what's happening right now and how are you moving and getting to the next level. But it's that balance of proving that you can think big, but proving that you have a really clear path on how to get there. You're probably going to be off. And investors know that you're probably going to be off, but the more you can show and justify the thought process to how you got there, that piece is more important than anything else. And I think it's true for valuation, it's true for projections, it's really true for any guess that you're making with your company. Any other questions?
So you touched on the investor side, on operating experience. Historically, a lot of the VC community came from companies that they had established, built, and exited, and then they came into the investment community. More recently, becoming a VC apparently is a formulaic, go to the right school, follow a process. And when you talk to some of the younger community, they describe themselves as operators, and then you find out that they did business development or product management for 2 years at a big name brand FANG company. How do you navigate that new generation? Because it seems like there are more of them now than experienced operators that are out there evaluating startups.
Yeah, it's interesting. We flipped the script, and I think it was deep into our Series A. And our Series A, we were at a point where it was kind of make or break for our company. We were weeks away from not being able to make payroll. We were at a point where if we don't get this funding, we're done. And we just decided we're going to throw it all out there. We're going to do this the way that what we're doing isn't working. And so let's change the way that we're doing this. And we started to really own, I think for the first time in those meetings, own our expertise. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think it's important to hone in a little bit on what that means. And we came in and we said, do we believe, and we stopped for a minute, we're like, do we actually believe this is a great investment opportunity? Like, really and truly, let's break it down. Let's think like investors think, and let's look at every reason this thing should fail. And let's figure out at the end of the day, if we were to start over right now, we have our careers ahead of us too. Is this really where we want to put our time and energy? And do we truly believe the outcome that we think is the outcome the outcome that we're saying is the outcome that's going to happen? Because it's so easy when you're a founder you're like in this mode of this is going to be successful and it has to be successful now because I've given so much time and there's all these sunk costs and you put everything into it. Taking that step back and like owning your expertise. And when we did that, it changed the way that we dealt with everybody. We started really looking for investors that could bring something to the table. And it's easy to say, everybody says, look for the investors, but when you're in desperation for capital, you kind of want money from anywhere. But when we started to own our expertise and we said, okay, who can actually help us get this company somewhere? What do we need? And how do we pitch this to them? And how do we get them excited about what we can do where they feel like they can add real value, but they also understand why we think this is such a great opportunity? It changed the way that we pitched. And I do think our pitching, our relationships with the investors, the way that we pitch going forward, it was like a 180. And it was funny because the one meeting when we were talking to Silicon Valley Bank, that was the one that we're like, if they say no, I don't know who else we have left to go to. And not only did they say yes, they brought in one of their LPs and said, we think this is a pretty major opportunity and here's why. And they ended up putting $10 million behind us collectively between the two of them. And it saved our company. So I think it's important, one, as you're looking for operators, for people that understand and that are going to be patient capital, they're going to be with your company through thick and thin. Things are going to go wrong. Things are going to be upside down at periods of time. Things are not going to pan out the way that you hoped they would. And a good investor, and typically one that understands operations, is going to be able to weather that storm with you because they've been there. An investor who has only been on the finance side and is only looking at the numbers doesn't understand that getting the right people into the right spots is critical. They don't understand that markets change and markets are dynamic. They don't understand that half of getting to the silver bullet, of success for your company is weathering through all of those failures. I used to be an investment banker, so it's very easy to sit on the other side of the table and be like, this is how it works. Like, what do you mean? You're only a $50 million business? That's nothing. If you're not over $1 billion, you're like a waste of a company. It's very easy to think that when you're on the other side of the table and you're seeing all these companies that are successful and having these, hyper growth experiences and growing, to forget what it's like and what the path is to actually get there. And so I think being realistic about who is on the other side of the table, calling a spade, and having the confidence that when someone doesn't know what they're talking about, that you're okay calling that out, again, in a respectful way, but sharing, let me explain to you how this works with my company, how this works with this experience, and what the reality is. But yeah, everyone can call themselves an operator. I think the investors that are willing to jump in and that are finding the failures in your company, or finding the areas of hey, have you thought about this? But are also bringing solutions, those are the very best ones. Connections are great, but the people who can work through solutions with you and roll up their sleeves, those investors are invaluable. And I'm going to give a shout out to QED because I mentioned Frank earlier. He is one of the best operators I've ever had the experience of working with, and jumps in with our team. He's in our Slack. He's on text with us all the time. He's met every single executive at our team. Really enjoys jumping into the weeds and helping us problem solve, but also is really patient in terms of, letting us work through things, helping us see things before they happen, but also understanding that there's going to be stuff that we're going to experience that we're going to learn from, and that's the cost of running a growing business. One more question?
Yeah, just one question. How do you address the risks of your pitch when presenting to an investor? Do you actually wait for them to bring it up later and won't be the pitch, or do you present it and bring it up during your presentation just to cover those bases in the meanwhile?
I always try to proactively address the risks, because I think the best way to shift a discussion, obviously you want to highlight the best parts of your company in those initial meetings. There's plenty of time to get into the things that are a little bit, meatier and not the ideal kind of shining stars of your business. Every business has their strengths, every business has their weaknesses. Address the risks because you want to show that you're looking at all pieces of the the company and that you're aware of the risks. If you're not aware of the risks, that's a red flag for everybody on the other side of the table. That, one, why aren't you seeing them? Why aren't you dealing with them? And why aren't you thinking about them? Two, it builds trust and credibility. And three, it lets you proactively address in a more trustworthy way, here's what we're doing, here's how we're handling that, and here's how we think about it, and here's how we're prioritizing it. We have areas of our company that it's not the, metrics that aren't growing as quickly as we'd like, or things that aren't, but part of it is that we've deprioritized it at the expense of other things that we've deemed more important to the long-term success of the company. And so we're very clear about, look, we recognize these are areas we have to work on, but we think this is a precursor to be able to do that in a more efficient way, or we think this is going to help us build a stronger competitive, barrier to entry, or, in our early days, we didn't worry so much about monetization. We worried a lot about community building, because we said, look, there's a lot of paths to monetization here, but if we can't build community, we can't succeed at this. And if we can't build scalable community and we can't do it at a really efficient cost, we can't succeed as a business. So that's our biggest thing. So here's where we're focused today. Here's how we can monetize. What we did do is say, we know it's not ideal, but here's some experiments we've run to prove that we can monetize the business in these ways. We just haven't focused here and haven't put our efforts here. But here's some experiments of where we think it will work in the future. And so I think if you're showing that you're thinking about it, even if it's not delivering in a way that you would like, or that still poses a really big risk to the company, at least it's proving that you're thoughtful and that you have a broad lens when you look at the risk assessment of the company. You had a question over here?
Earlier, you told a story about how, you weren't really reaching the investors. The guys down the hall were high-fiving. They were going to get the investment, right?
I should note, they were wearing basketball shorts too. That's what made it harder. We're like, they just walked in here in basketball shorts and they just got an investment.
So I was just curious, is there been a crash and burn type of story on pitches, or that you've known about? And then what did you realize after the fact, oh, this is what I did wrong?
Yes. I think the ones that went the most wrong for us, if I look at some of our worst pitches, it was where we let the investor drive the discussion. And sometimes it's just personality. Somebody came in and they start, before you get through your first slide or before you've even gotten through your introduction of what they're doing, they start firing questions at you. And we would jump over to answer the question, and we'd jump over to answer another question. It was like there was no cohesion to the story that we were telling. And in the end, we're like, they didn't get it at all. In hindsight, I think that's sort of become a red flag for us. Of like, that's not, this investor just doesn't get it. They're probably not going to get there anyway. So I don't know that we could have managed it differently necessarily, but we did start to take those moments to either say, like when we walk into a meeting, Elizabeth, my co-founder, and I have the signal, we're like, okay, this is not going anywhere. Let's just end this as fast as possible so we can get our time back and get their time back. And so when we know something's off, either like it's just somebody that we're like, we don't even want you on our cap table, so forget this. Or we just know there's absolutely no way they're going to invest in us. We just try to wind it down quickly and turn, an hour meeting into a 30-minute meeting, or a 30-minute meeting into a 15-minute meeting, and let's just wrap this and move on. And that's okay. I think the reality is, it's like meeting people. Sometimes you're at a networking event and you start talking to someone and you're like, okay, all right, time to move on to the next person. And sometimes you really click and it works and it's great. That's just life, and I think investments are very much the same. We have time for probably one more question. Yeah.
Is there a different strategy that you would use if you're a Latin company raising from Latin American investors versus U.S. investors, especially operational scale centers or family offices? Is there a different strategy you're specifically trying to raise from Latin?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have investors from all over, and I work with a lot of companies now. I actually live in Spain, from a lot of companies that operate in Spain and then across Latin America. And at the end of the day, I think it's quite similar. I think the valuations are different, the check sizes are different, but I think the process is very much the same. I think it starts with relationship building. I think with every single pitch, asking for connections and opening the door to other investors, even if they say no, they know people in the ecosystem where it might be a better fit. I think it's following up with those relationships, continuing to build those relationships over time and to show those proof points. I do think culturally, in some cultures, the volume of checks is, and that's not culture, but just I think in some countries, the volume of checks is different, and so they're more thoughtful about where they put that capital, meaning they oftentimes take longer to write the check. I think the U.S., if you go to places like Silicon Valley or New York or Boston, sometimes those checks flow very quickly because they have a high volume, and writing an early stage check of $100,000 or $250,000 is not a big deal. Versus if you go to some Latin American countries, that's a much more significant check size. And so I think knowing the market, but I think the process at the end of the day is the same. All right, well, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to come join. I hope you got some helpful hints from one another, and hopefully from some of the stories I shared. If anyone ever has questions on fundraising, I'm always happy to answer. My email is just carolyn@helloalice.com. It's also in the app for those of you on the app. But I think I'm super passionate about getting more dollars into the hands of Latinos and into other markets. And so if there's ever anything that I can be helpful with, happy to share. But thank you all. Have a great rest of your conference.